Hello and welcome to an episode of Atomic Vinyl Reviews. My name is Jacob, and today I'm doing a video on Kong's growth in the Legendary Pictures MonsterVerse films. In particular, his dramatic increase in size between the Kong Skull Island film set in 1973 and Godzilla vs. Kong, which is set in present day. At least we assume it's definitely set sometime within this decade, we can assume. The reason I'm making this video is because I happen to frequent a lot of the Godzilla fan groups on Facebook and stuff like that, and I've been seeing a rapid increase in posts about people talking about this subject and people talking about other people talking about this subject, and in particular those ones have been kind of starting to tick me off a little bit, and I just wanted to make a nice in-depth, nuanced video discussing my thoughts on the topic. I think the best way for me to really illustrate where I'm coming from is to just read one of these posts out so you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. So this is just a random one I happened to stumble upon the other day, and I did have an interesting conversation below it actually, but this is how it goes. Please watch Skull Island before you say, "How did Kong get so big?" I love watching reaction videos, but damn if I'm wrong that every reaction video I saw that question was asked. Drove me crazy! This next part is in caps. It says, 40 years to grow! It's actually closer to 50, which makes this even more funny. Now, my main issue with these sort of posts is they all seem to act as if the people who are critical of Kong's growth didn't see that part in Kong Skull Island where John C. Reilly's character said, Kong is still growing. And I don't believe that is true at all. And I think they know it. Like, seriously. Seriously. Every single person knows that Kong was still growing in that film. They saw the film, they read the line. The reason they are freaking out about Kong growing so big is because he grew so damn big. Later on, I'm going to illustrate to you exactly how big that was, but I feel like before I continue, I just want to really stress that I understand that Godzilla movies and Kong movies, these are movies about giant monsters punching each other. You need a huge suspension of disbelief in these movies, and stuff is gonna come across as contrived, no matter what. Even just the fact that creatures like Godzilla and Kong can exist and can step on dry land and not collapse under their own weight is a contrivance. We get that. I get that. That's self-evident. And you know what? I'm one of the people who live between these two worlds. On the one hand, I really do love it when a film is really well grounded, everything makes sense, there's internal consistency and logic and all that stuff as best as it can, as well as with nature and the reality itself. That's really good and helps really get you invested in a movie. But a lot of my favorite Godzilla movies are the really stupid, campy ones, like Godzilla vs. Megalon, Godzilla Final Wars, Invasion of Astro Monster, where they literally shoot Godzilla and Rodan off into space and all that crazy stuff, or the Showa Gamera series, or all that crazy stuff. Completely get the appeal of just being like, just turn off your head, turn off your brain, rather, and just enjoy the movie for what it is. Don't think about it too hard. I completely understand that, and I think that's why these posts are so common. It's because people see somebody being critical of some of these aspects, and their initial sort of triggered reaction is to say, it's just a movie, get over it, people. And you know what? I get that. But I think some contrivances are more contrived and lazy than others. And in a Hollywood blockbuster movie like this, especially if the tone that the MonsterVerse is trying to give us, as well as the actual internal consistency between Kong Skull Island and this film, it comes across as lazy. At least leaving it at that. Just the assumption that we just have to be okay with the fact that they said he's still growing. I'm pretty damn sure, or at least I hope, that they will give us a better explanation as to Kong's unnatural growth. Because just saying he's a teenager, and they did specify that he was a teenager. The director of the film himself specified that Kong was about 14 years old if he was in human years. If we translate that to an actual ape, you can kind of picture how big he should have gotten, and the size that he did get is just, oh, that's crazy looking compared to it. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just show you this visually, because I think this is just the best way to just really wrap your head around why some people think, and rightfully so, think that this is a bit of a contrivance. Here we have the Playmates 6.5-inch Kong from Skull Island. Considering this Kong is meant to be a teenager, now I think he's built like a freaking adult, like a grown man. I mean, look at this guy. This is a nice accurate figure of this Kong, by the way. So this is the is it Star Race or A Star? Yeah, Star Race. I always mix those up. Basically the X Plus of this Kong. This figure is very accurate to him, and now this Kong's not a toddler. Kong is an ape. Humans are apes. Gorillas are apes. This Kong is actually kind of a mix between. You can picture basically what the growth stages of this creature would look like. If he was a baby, he would look like a baby. We know this. Like that's just intuitive. It makes sense. You look at this thing. This is clearly not a baby. The director himself said he's a teenager. That makes sense because he's built like a grown man. Look at this thing. Right? So if we have this Kong like this, and this Kong, within 50 years, a bit less, grows to the size of Godzilla. How big do you think that Godzilla would be next to this Kong if he were still the same size as Skull Island? Would he be this big? Obviously not, because Godzilla is much bigger than Kong. Nope. But I didn't have like a nice slightly in between figure to compare it to, so I had to use that one. Would he grow this big? Is this how big the size difference is? That's even quite a big size difference, I would say. If this Kong were to grow to the height of this Godzilla, that would be pushing it. Like, that still wouldn't be natural. Like, a teenager. This guy was the size of his dead parents, basically. And they were sexually mature adults, right? In order to produce this Kong. Their skeletons were basically the same size as him, if not identical, right? So even if this is him as a teenager and he grows to be this size by the time he fights Godzilla in Godzilla vs. Kong, that would be kind of a bit contrived as well, right? This is not how big Godzilla would be next to this Kong. He wouldn't even be this big. Now this figure's only slightly taller, but it's still even bigger, right? No, that's not even close. This is how big Godzilla is compared to the Skull Island Kong. This is the biggest figure I own. Now, I've taken the tail off of him, and he has little itty-bitty spines because this is a children's toy and they don't want children to get hurt, so he's not the best representation of this Godzilla, but he does the job. And he's actually really, really close to being perfectly in scale with this thing. This is basically spot on. Right? Look at this thing. This thing, as a teenager, even if this was a child, it's like seriously, even if, from this tiny, tiny height, barely even the bulk of Godzilla's lower leg here, grows to something that stands eye to eye with this monolith in less than a human lifetime. And he was already basically fully grown in Skull Island to begin with. What the... Look, just in case you guys don't believe me, I actually did the math on this and came up with this scaling. Here I've got your standard 30 centimeter ruler. It's 12 inches long. This is actually perfect because in the movie, Godzilla stands at 120 meters high. Well, 119.8 or something like that. 393 feet tall to be specific, but if you don't use the metric system. But basically that translates to 120 meters, give or take a fraction of a meter, right? We have 120 little notches on this ruler, if you count all these little increments of 10 between every inch. So we can just assume that these are a meter. There's a ruler, and you can see between every inch there's 10 increments. I'm not really familiar with the imperial system or whatever it's called. I use the metric system, so I don't know what these are called in your guys' lingo, but you know, an increment of 10 between every inch. So if we assume that these increments are meters, this gives us a perfect scale of 120 meters. Now, I actually have a figure which is exactly 12 inches tall. This NECA figure here, it's the NECA Deluxe Godzilla 2014 figure, the nice giant one. He measures spot on at the 12-inch mark, meaning this guy is, if we use this scaling, is exactly the size of Godzilla in King of the Monsters. Basically exactly the height that Kong would grow to. What I did is I drew up a little scale here in the same metric, and I drew Kong on it. So each one of these increments is an inch tall, right? So this goes up to 100 meters up here. This Kong measures just over 30 meters, so just under 32 meters. I even was a bit generous and I just drew a line here, 32 meters. There's our Kong. You can even see there's a little person down the bottom right there. There we go. There's our Kong in 1973. This guy fights this thing in Godzilla vs. Kong. Look at that. He's just barely... If we put Godzilla's foot up to that line, Kong is just barely reaching Godzilla's knee. I've actually got another figure that's a really good comparison, because this figure here, I think he actually scales pretty well. This is the really big Playmates Kong from Skull Island, but he actually scales pretty well with this NECA Godzilla, which means that he's in about the same scaling as we're working with here. Actually, he might be a little bit short, even, but I'm trying to be generous. I could have used my Star Ace figure, which is fallen back here. He scales pretty well with this Godzilla as well. In fact, he might even be a tad taller, almost, than he is in Godzilla vs. Kong. It's hard to tell because all we have to go off of is what we see in the trailers, but we do get a pretty good shot of the two monsters together on that aircraft carrier. There's actually another one of those contrivances that the internet has been crazy about recently. I don't even want to touch on that one. Actually, I will touch on it real quick. Basically, my analysis of that is, I'm assuming that aircraft carrier was probably like a special aircraft carrier or special ship designed to transport Kong. So it is contrived, but it actually, that's what I'm expecting to be the explanation in the film, so I'm not too bugged by that. This Kong here, I think, this is a fair analysis of a Kong that stacks up next to a Godzilla to be roughly the same size as they are in that movie. In fact, again, I think this one is too short. That Star Ace one is actually more on point because he's bigger. Look at this. Seriously? You're gonna tell me that it's not contrived, that this little, almost full grown, because, again, he's built like a grown man, and he's in his mid-teens, and he's meant to grow into something like this. And the only explanation we have is he's still growing, and we're meant to be fine with that. I don't know. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna read out a reply that somebody else posted to that previous comment that I read out to you guys. because I think this guy worded it so beautifully and it really encapsulates my opinion on this topic. So again, this is a reply to that previous comment where they were just like, please watch Skull Island before you say, how did Kong get so big, blah blah blah. And okay, their reply is actually a reply to another reply on that comment, but it's still related. So somebody else replied, and this is somebody I disagree with, and they said, like, I'm not for Kong really, I just want the damn movie to come out. But you're telling me no one believes he grew that big in the amount of time? Just look at children. They double their size in years. How is he getting bigger any different? And now this absolute lad replies with this. Funny, I've never seen a 13 to 15-year-old triple in size. Kong was an adolescent in Skull Island, not a toddler. His parents were not much bigger than he was when they died. It should also be pointed out that all mammals, including primates, stop growing after reaching adulthood. So no, it's a lazy, lame reason, mostly because it goes against the canon established in Skull Island, which is more of the issue since we are dealing with imaginary animals. Obviously, Kong from Skull Island, even as an adult, is something that Godzilla would do nothing more than step on. He's a joke comparatively. So they had to grow him up. Radiation is the easiest, if inaccurate, way to do it. But there are issues with that. Unless he goes into the Hollow Earth, which it looks likely that he might have, and live there, and ta-da! Big monkey. At least you can work that into the canon, and have it at least somewhat believable. But just growing doesn't make sense, considering he didn't grow much from 1945 to 1973. And I replied to his comment, thank you, you're spot on, good to finally see someone else talking sense. And to that he replied, yeah, it's been kinda irritating. Granted, most people don't have the biology background I have, marine biology. So it doesn't likely bother them like it does me. And I'm not much of a Kong fan either. But I also realize my bias. From a money-making standpoint, this is a great matchup. You just have to find a way that at least makes it legit. He grows is the laziest. What was established in Skull Island is that he was a teenager. I mean, it's one thing to retcon Kong and make him 350 plus feet tall, a la Godzilla 2014. But it's another to take a 104-foot teen and make a nearly 400-foot adult. It's funny because whilst it's generally okay to make any kaiju, even though physics tells us they would collapse under their own weight, Kong going from 104 feet as a teenager to almost 400 as an adult is a much bigger plot hole for most people. Kinda like Spider-Man kicking the snot out of Galactus, because reasons. Kong is more popular worldwide, I expect, but Godzilla has always been much larger and more powerful, except when Kong gets a huge boost to size and powers. It's contrived when you look at the canon on both creatures, but from a marketing aspect it makes all the sense in the world. Best thing to do is try and find a way that doesn't look so lazy. Find something that works well with the established canon. And I completely agreed with his comment. So my point again is, I'm not upset that they did make Kong change like that, but my point really to sum up this video is that the people complaining about it, they have sense. There's reason there. And to blindly say that, well, they said he's still growing, is it's lazy and contrived. It really is. And that's my standpoint on it. And again, it's not going to ruin the movie for me, even if they just don't address it at all, and they just say, yeah, he grew, because that's what all good Kongs do. I don't know. It's not going to ruin the movie for me or anything like that, and it shouldn't ruin the movie for you or anything like that. But I just think these comments on Facebook and wherever, where people just assuming that people just didn't hear that line in Kong Skull Island, are just so infuriating and really patronizing to the rest of our intelligence. Hey guys, this is Future Jacob here. I'm actually filming this segment, or rather recording, just because I didn't really feel like doing the full filming setup and everything, because it's quite late. So I'm just doing a little voiceover here at the end to touch on a few points that I missed out in the rest of the video. I was actually intending on talking about these things earlier on, but since I did this video in a number of different takes, I kind of ended up deleting a lot of the ones which I did touch on these things. So yeah, I'm just doing it from scratch. So the first point is, I wanted to touch on the possible theory that Godzilla is shrinking or has shrunk in the coming Godzilla vs. Kong movie. I think there is no way that this is the case. This theory first popped up in combination because of people freaking about Kong's growth being so dramatic, I mean understandably, and the fact that most of the buildings in the new trailer towered over Godzilla. Not to mention there's the whole theory that the Godzilla that we're seeing in this movie is Mechagodzilla, but I'll quickly rule that out. Now, we don't really have very good pictures of Mechagodzilla, but from all the figures that we do have toy leaks of, or photo leaks of, rather, of the toys, we can see that the Mechagodzilla in the upcoming film... I should have said spoilers, but you guys already know this. If you're watching this video, you're enough of a Godzilla nerd to bloody well know that Mechagodzilla is... spoilers in the upcoming movie. So his arms are these big massive lanky things, and there's no way that you'd fit them in like a Godzilla suit. And just the fact that he does appear early in the trailer, a little glimpse of his face, and it's, you know, the actual robot face, kind of leads me to think that why would they show that? Like, that looked like an early scene in the movie, so I doubt they would then cover him up and then have Kong fight him, and it just doesn't work for me. So I don't think it's Mechagodzilla. The other thing is, people completely underestimate how massive modern-day skyscrapers can be. Even in the previous MonsterVerse films, there were plenty of buildings taller than Godzilla. Think back to the massive one that crashed on him in the 2014 movie, or even Shin Godzilla, for example, who, for all intents and purposes, is basically the same size as the MonsterVerse Godzilla, give or take a couple of meters. There were massive buildings at the end of that movie that were strategically dropped or blown up at the base to actually crash down on him. Those are real buildings in Tokyo. So don't think that just the fact that in this trailer there are buildings taller than Godzilla, that means that the Godzilla shrunk. Also, for some reason, filmmakers from recent years seem to be hell-bent on making Godzilla bigger in every single movie than the previous one. I really doubt that they would just shrink him and break this trend in this movie, in this continuity especially. For example, it started with Godzilla 2014 when he was the tallest Godzilla yet, coming in at like 100 and... I don't remember the exact height, it was like 110 meters or something. I think previously the biggest one was like the Final Wars Godzilla at like 100 meters. And then, after Godzilla 2014 was the biggest one, then Shin Godzilla comes along and he's like, yeah, I'm 118 meters. Beat that. And then that year the anime Godzilla came out and he maniacally laughed and dwarfed them to such extremes. Because he was like 300 meters or something, the size of a freaking mountain. And then the 2019 Godzilla showed up and he was just like, okay, that's just ridiculous. I'll just be a tiny bit taller than Shin Godzilla. Yeah, I think it would be absolutely bizarre to make Godzilla smaller in the upcoming movie. Like, they won't shrink Godzilla, come on. It just doesn't have that grandeur to it as well. Although personally, I'm not really a big fan of like Godzilla just being bigger. I really don't think it adds anything, especially to the movies. Like, did making it bigger from 2014 to 2019 really change anything? I don't think so. Moving on, I wanted to touch on something that a friend of mine, Harold from the Figure Mania show, had been talking about. I did a podcast with him, a podcast episode that I haven't released yet, which is my bad. I really need to get my game on with that and actually edit that video and put it out. So big, huge shout out to Harold. And an apology about that, because that was done quite a long time ago before the trailer came out. But we talked quite a bit in that video, and he had this really interesting point about why did they make Kong the exact same size as Godzilla if they were giving him a weapon, feeling that that makes Kong overpowered and that they were clearly trying to really freaking compensate and make Kong as strong as they could, when he would have rather they had kept Kong a bit smaller and thus made him more reliant on using those weapons and his agility to compensate for his size, which, to an extent I agree with actually. But on the other hand, I did rewatch King of the Monsters the other night, and I think it's a moot point because Godzilla is so powerful, and Kong needs all the help he can get so even if he was bigger than Godzilla and had an axe, I think Godzilla could still take him, honestly. At least that's my humble, uneducated opinion. Ultimately, if it were up to me, I think they should have, first off, not scaled up Godzilla in King of the Monsters. I really don't think it added much to the movie, like I said, and possibly I think they could have even made him a bit shorter in the 2014 film, but again, that was the first film. All these sequels are probably all planned after, so that's, again, another moot point. They should have also either scaled down Kong in Godzilla vs. Kong, the upcoming film, like Harold said, making him focus on using his intelligence and agility and all that good stuff to fight Godzilla rather than just brute size, or they should have scaled up Kong in the Skull Island film. They knew that there were plans to make Godzilla and Kong fight from the very start when they were making that movie. That's why they even put the line in there that they were just like, well, he's still growing. That's why they put that in there. So it would have made sense to just scale him up to begin with. But again, I can, play devil's advocate. I can see why they didn't. I too prefer Kong and kaiju in general to be smaller, relatively speaking. It means that they can interact with people a lot better, with a lot more nuance, and makes it much more personal, and they can interact with their environments much more, and then the environment can be more detailed, like in the old Showa Godzilla movies, where the monsters are about 50 meters tall, give or take, and the miniature buildings were so much more detailed. I actually watched a lot of documentaries about the making of these miniature buildings, and they actually were pretty adamant, the people who at Toho who built the miniatures and stuff, they much preferred working on the far more detailed miniatures of the Showa era when the monsters were relatively smaller compared to, say, the Heisei era when they beefed Godzilla up to around 90 meters and then later to 100 meters. So they did that, of course, because the skyline of Tokyo and other cities were just growing and growing and growing since Godzilla first came out, and they wanted Godzilla to not look tiny next to the new modern city buildings. So that's kind of like a little disadvantage that we generally have with modern day kaiju films in general, and that's something I might do a whole video on. That sounds actually, yeah. Just spur of the moment, I think that I've had an idea about that. But that's my kind of take on that, and another option would have been to make Kong a literal baby. A literal baby in the Skull Island film. Although, obviously I get why they didn't. He would have looked all cutesy, like Manila, the son of Godzilla, which everyone hates. Or Toto, if I'm pronouncing that right, from Gamera the Brave, back when, basically son of Gamera, when they had this cutesy freaking version of Gamera. And that would have been a bizarre choice if they did that. And it would have been a nightmare to try and sell toys of that. Speaking of which, ultimately I think the reason they made Kong the same height as Godzilla is not just because they wanted to even out the playing field, not even for that contrivance. I think it was because they thought it would look better that way in the toys. Because imagine, you have a Godzilla toy and a Kong toy, or you have two kids playing, or you're like me and you're a grown collector and you want to just have them next to each other. They look better if they're the same height, give or take, compared to if you're seeing what I'm seeing on the screen right now. Well, you are, because I've superimposed it into the video. So there's massive Godzilla and a little itty bitty Kong baby toy. That wouldn't fly. If you think about it, toy sales really weigh out everything. And I should know. I'm the one who's been buying most of them. But yeah, that's just my little take on this stuff. I'm sorry if my previous video did come across as a bit ranty. Anyway, I'll cut back to past Jacob and we'll finish off the video. Thanks for listening this long, by the way, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. That's my take on this thing, but what do you guys think? Leave your thoughts and comments and a flame war in the comments down below. I'm absolutely exhausted because I think this video took like 5 takes and my voice is extremely sore now. So I'm gonna retire for tonight. I'll see you next time. But till then, may all your vinyl be irradiated vinyl. Over and out. Bye.